Hello, everyone, and welcome to Transcendent Philosophy. This is Seth here, and today we're going to be going over one of my earliest blog posts, which was my attempt to formulate my thoughts around what transcendent philosophy was supposed to be about. And obviously, it's been a work in progress as I've been trying to learn everything I can and to grow in this area. But these were kind of my initial premonitions, my initial feelings that kind of were some of the foundational thoughts that kind of led me to on this path. So we'll take it for what it's worth and see what I've got. Introduction to Transcendent Philosophy, a philosophy of peace and unity. Premise. I have seen the political polarization growing for many years and have been increasingly worried about it. Absent new developments within our culture, I see an unavoidable chain of events that involve increasing polarization and demonization that eventually culminates in civil war. I find this future unacceptable. I hate the idea that one day a civil war may force me to choose between killing friends or family. Perhaps some people think that when civil war breaks out, they will have the luxurious option of not choosing a side and laying down like a lamb for the slaughter out of a desire to not shed blood. I find this perspective somewhat naive and unrealistic. I don't think human psychology is oriented to not give up so easily. I would imagine that evolution would rather inspire you with anger to motivate you in choosing a side rather than giving up on life. Also, even if you manage to pull off being a bystander, what makes you think that your hot-headed loved ones won't be forced to do the dirty work of killing to protect you? Your lack of action just forces your loved ones to kill on your behalf so that you can keep your conscience clean. This brings to my mind such a horrific image of reality that I am inspired to do everything within my power to help avoid it. I have nascently concluded that better philosophy and better epistemology is the way forward. Yet I'm not an expert in either. I was hoping to be able to spend a few years studying philosophy to get a better grounding before trying to develop a solution to this pending social catastrophe. Yet it seems that the polarization is growing faster than I can keep up with. I look around at the ideological landscape and see many people who notice the problem, yet few who are able to offer any solutions. I don't want to be the one providing solutions, but someone needs to do it. I can't sit back and idly watch the cultural decay of my nation without trying to do something. But obviously, I am not enough. The way I see it, we need as much collective brainpower on this issue as we can get. The more people who join in on the discussion for brainstorming solutions, the better chance we have. I feel compelled to share my thoughts and hope others will as well. Because time is of the essence, I feel forced to show my hand and attempt to provide my best guess at a solution for our society. The solution could perhaps be summarized as follows. Number 1, transcend biases. Number 2, transcend demonization. Number 3, believe narratives only in proportion to the evidence. Number 4, worship unity as the highest value. Number 1, transcending biases. This could include religion, politics, conspiracies, and morality. Transcending theism. I have always been passionate about truth, especially when I believe truth can make the world a better place. Ever since I was 9 years old, I had my first experience with God in prayer that led me to conclude that I was 100% confident in the truth of God's existence. I boldly took my truth to challenge atheist scientists online, because my perspective was that if I truly had the truth, then it should naturally be persuasive and force others to accept its veracity. I always believed truth would prevail over falsehoods if they came together in verbal combat. So I wasn't afraid to make my case for God known to the world. By interacting with those with opposite perspectives to mine, I confronted the mythological dragon of chaos. Yet it was purely my religious biases that caused me to believe atheists were evil, God-hating monsters, basically. When faced with the reality of truth-loving skeptics, I was forced to admit that the true nature of atheists was different from my emotional image of an evil creature. I transcended my bias against them. I came to realize that the truth of God is much more complicated than it seems, and my mere prayer is not good enough evidence, despite how powerful it felt. Transcending politics. I also grew up passionate about politics. I grew up in a conservative family. I naturally took a liking to the principle of efficiency, which low taxes and low regulation and free market forces seemed to magnify so well. I became dogmatic about the principle of efficiency and viewed it as the most important political goal. I became so obsessed with the idea of efficiency that I began to think that perhaps the disabled and the elderly were a problem, since they represented inefficient forces within our society. Yet in my pursuit of truth, I purposefully sought out those with opposite perspectives to see if my ideas could hold their weight. I eventually came to the conclusion that my obsession with efficiency had grown to be pathological. I learned that empathy was an equal, if not more important virtue than efficiency. I grew to accept the idea that perhaps a mix of socialism, empathy, and capitalism, efficiency, would be a better solution than having only one unbalanced virtue. Hence, Andrew Yang's proposal for a UBI seemed like a perfect marriage of efficiency to empathy. Transcending conspiracy theories. I used to be very willing to believe any narrative produced by my tribe. I believe my religious upbringing assisted in my conspiratorial thinking. Since religions are conspiracy theories in and of themselves, there is some esoteric knowledge that only the righteous in-group is aware of, and the out-group is either evil or ignorant. Because accepting the narrative, faith, is framed as virtuous. Questioning the narrative becomes framed as evil. Hence, your epistemology is corrupted by axiomatic assumptions that commit the begging the question fallacy. You can't assume the accuracy of a narrative before vetting it for accuracy. You can't assume that a narrative is righteous before vetting it for righteousness. You can't just assume your conclusion and then search only for evidence that supports your conclusion. Cherry picking. And then ignore evidence that goes against your righteous conclusion. Confirmation bias. Yet, I was completely guilty of this. I believed almost every Republican narrative about Obama without having any evidence to justify my belief in those narratives. I had already concluded that the Republican team was righteous and that any narrative they produced must be true. Because how could a righteous Republican lie to me? Conversely, it was easy for me to believe that everyone on the left was a liar, since that was the evil team. Yet over and over, I had interactions with honest, truth-seeking, fair-minded liberals that forced me to accept that my framework for viewing the world was greatly in error, cognitive dissonance, and that I needed a paradigm shift if I wanted to have a more truthful way of understanding the world. Over and over, these liberals practiced a superior form of epistemology to help guide me to the truth. I didn't even have a semblance of an epistemology. I just believed any conspiracy that came from my team. Appeal to authority fallacy. Yet these liberals, instead of reacting like a dragon that had an irrational desire to suppress the truth, they appeared impartial and unbiased as they helped me search for evidence to either confirm or deny the claims of my conspiracy theories. I realized that I was completely wrong in my approach to obtaining truth. I realized I needed to search all areas of the intellectual landscape for information, not just my echo chamber that confirmed my biases. Eventually, I learned a useful precept from an atheist that helped me to know when and how to deal with conspiracies. You need to match the level of your belief to the quality and quantity of the evidence. Transcending demonization. After so many experiences having my framework for understanding the world blown apart by my exploration of it, I realized that the demonization of others is one of the most dangerous problems that corrupts us. Transitioning from a religious social group to a non-religious social group helped me realize that non-religious people are not the immoral monsters the religious can sometimes make them out to be. I was guilty of demonizing all sorts of groups because of my biases, but a careful exploration of reality proved all of my demonization as incorrect and unfounded. Further, pondering on the topic of demonization seemed to illuminate it as the cause of major conflicts. There's a good argument for saying that Hitler created atrocities by demonizing the Jews. Marx inspired atrocities by demonizing the rich. Anarchists inspire atrocities by demonizing government. And Christians inspire atrocities by demonizing Muslims, and vice versa. And the most dangerous atrocity of nuclear holocaust was almost made a reality by the demonization between Russia and the United States. Yet our intuition tells us that the average Russian is not evil, nor is the average American evil. How can we allow the world to be destroyed upon the basis of our incorrect conclusions about other people? I think that one of the most sad things imaginable is to murder someone that you thought was evil only to realize that you are wrong. Yet this is what demonization leads to. It is a pathology that must be transcended. Philosophy of transcendence. Even though most of my ideological transitions are from right to center, or a little bit to the left, I am not trying to make a case that the left has nothing that they can improve upon. I believe that the left has plenty of quasi-religious fervor, echo chamber biases, and conspiratorial thinking. And also demonization of the other. I believe that both sides need to transcend to a higher ideological state and see both sides from a bird's eye view and consciously weigh the pros and cons of each and try to build a super ideology that combines the strengths of each and mitigates their weaknesses. We need to actively attack our own biases because they are the biggest enemies to our pursuit of truth. Transcendence means to search for truth via a dialectic. Truth is more important than winning. Whereas a debate, the philosophy is winning is more important than the truth. Transcendence means giving up your biases that keep you in an ideological rut. Transcendence is the key to bridging that gap between ideologies and merging humanity into one super truth. The benefit of biases. We are all full of all sorts of biases based in heuristics for understanding reality more rapidly. Biases help us navigate the world without using too much of our computing resources. That leaves more brain power for more important matters. We have biases for food to guide our nutrition. We have biases against filth to guide our health. We have biases against dangerous objects or situations to guide our survival. We have moral biases that guide our cooperation with others. The danger of biases. Evolution might have us evolve selfish biases that prioritize family or tribe over others. We might evolve a mutation for an incorrect bias. Humans uniquely have been able to evolve the ability to create cultures and ideologies. Yet, we might become tricked by our own biases. Cultures and ideologies are biases in and of themselves. Yet much of these biases are a product of our own creation. there may be an evolutionary substrate beneath culture and ideology. For example, a culture may favor a certain type of vehicle. Culture A may favor inefficient sports cars. Culture B may favor environmentally friendly electric cars. Culture C may favor a large and sturdy truck. The sports car may be connected to the evolutionary substrate of prioritizing status, fame, and riches. The electric car may be connected to the evolutionary substrate of prioritizing health, cleanliness, cooperation with nature, empathy, etc. The truck may be connected to the evolutionary substrate of hard work, physical power, bigger is better, stability, etc. I think ideologies are the same way. Each set of ideas hacks into a different evolutionary substrate. Libertarianism might be hacked into the substrate of efficiency and freedom. Communism may be hacked into the substrate of fairness and empathy. Each might have its relevance and importance. Based on our environment, we might need one set of values more than the other, so it can be helpful to have a culture or ideology that helps us magnify the evolutionary substrates that we need at a given time and a given environment. Yet if one set of ideas gets exaggerated and extremized, that subsystem can become pathologized by ignoring all the other important evolutionary subsystems. The power of religion. Just as we have a culture to augment an evolutionary substrate of biases, religion can augment a culture. If we think of culture as helping our behavior adapt to the environment faster than evolution might, religion could be thought of as a more powerful adaptation than culture. Religion provides more extreme behavioral change and more stability over time. Ancient religions are too rooted in the past. They might have been beneficial adaptations in their time, but the world has changed too much for them to still be fully relevant. Perhaps we need a new digital age religion for helping us adapt quickly to the dangers of our technology. Significance of morality. Evolution guides us to develop morality because in the absence of morality, we might not survive. Anything with survival importance will be genetically encoded within us to trigger powerful emotional responses. You can gauge how important something is to someone by the level of their emotional response. For example, the individual instinct for survival is incredibly powerful. If you've played a VR game where you stand on the edge of the cliff and try to walk forward, you'll find out real quickly how powerful that instinct is. Yet, there are certain ideas that are more powerful than the instinct for survival. For example, the desire to protect one's children or loved ones. Is that desire to help others can sometimes be more powerful than the desire to protect oneself. This seems to be giving us evidence that evolution believes saving children is more valuable to the future of the species than saving yourself. That's the only way that heroic instinct makes sense, if there's a net benefit to the species. Since what we value guides our decisions, and the fact that your own life carries within it a certain inherent threshold of value, I would say that anything that we value more than our own life itself could be determined or could be termed a transcendent value. So love for children would be classified as a transcendent value. Moral codes, because they're so important to our survival, they can often carry this status of a transcendent value. Moral codes get embodied within religious groups, political groups, ideological groups, and their importance is so fundamental because A common moral framework is so necessary for our survival and cooperation as a species. So evolution has given us a large amount of emotion to support our frameworks. This is why people get triggered when their moral framework is threatened. If you challenge someone's religion, challenge their politics, challenge their core beliefs, you will trigger a very powerful response, and that could be a transcendent response if that is something that they are willing to die for. The danger of moral polarization. Historically, moral codes would be common within tribes and different between them. This would lead to demonization of the other, since the other has behaviors and rituals that are different and therefore evil by virtue of being different. The Bible is full of examples of Israelite genocide of other tribes in the nearby vicinity that were deemed evil by the Israeli moral code. When moral codes are more similar between countries or tribes, religious syncretic fusion can occur, where they absorb aspects of their moral code from each other. As moral codes begin to polarize and grow further apart, that religious syncretic fusion becomes less and less likely, and war becomes more and more likely as a final destination. An evolutionary test for determining which set of moral codes is superior for survival. The moral divide. Every topic I have engaged with seems to be, upon deeper investigation, 1,000 times more complicated than it appeared at the onset. Morality is no exception. Many people think morality is black and white, cut and dry, yet when presented with complex situations, the gray area becomes obvious. I think it is wise to understand the complexity of morality, because an incorrect moral judgment can make the world a worse place, and incorrect attitudes about morality can lead to war. Morality is how we define what is good or evil, an inherent religious substrate of our emotions. We determine what should be supported with morality. We also determine what should be destroyed with morality. Yet the most fatal flaw in biased moral thinking is to judge other people using our own personal moral framework. That which is truly evil, or consciously evil, must be evil according to its own moral framework. Too often I see, for example, Christian right-wingers say that the left is evil because they support abortion, homosexuality, sex work, etc., etc. Or left-wingers say the right is evil because they support racism, homophobia, unfairly low wages, pollution, etc., etc., etc. Often the moral conflict seems to me to be a difference of preference for utilitarian moral ethics, or consequentialism, or deontological moral ethics, or categoricalism. Yet, funnily enough, often people switch between utilitarian and deontological thinking on different topics. To me, it seems that what we care about deeply will fall into deontological thinking, in that we are dogmatically strict about certain moral no-nos. Utilitarianism means that we measure the pros and cons before determining what we should do, trying to find the best net consequence. Deontological morality means that you have a duty to not do certain things because they are categorically bad or even evil. It doesn't matter what the consequences are. For example, when it comes to abortion, the Christian might say that abortion is categorically bad or categorically evil, and not even consider the consequences. Yet the left might try to weigh the pros and cons and see if perhaps abortion might improve the world in some way, based on some other metrics. Neither side is necessarily evil because neither side is intentionally violating their own ethic. Same with something like borders. The left might say the strict borders are exclusionary and racist. They might view national borders as categorically evil. Yet the right might try to measure the pros and cons of border policy and arrive at something that makes the world a better place. With the coronavirus and censorship, the left seems more biased to take a utilitarian approach, measuring the pros and cons of policies and trying to get the best consequence. The right seems more focused on the deontological aspects of the duty to respect each individual's right to their own person and their right to their own speech. From the right's perspective, it doesn't matter if pure freedom brings a bad consequence. It's our duty to prioritize freedom over consequences. The danger of freedom. The way I see it, societies can only properly function when everyone has a similar moral code. Our evolutionary history was rather tyrannical. Whether it was social order by family, or gang, or tribe, or religion, or city, or state, or nation, or empire, it seems like most of the time we evolved within a moral code that was imposed tyrannically in a top-down fashion. The leader had the power to punish anyone who deviated from the collective moral code. By tyrannically keeping everyone on the same moral page, they created stability. As we evolved larger social groups, we expanded the scope of our in-group, out-group, family-enemy psychology. The Christian empires were necessarily at odds with the Muslim empires. The more friction between two groups' moral codes, the more likely there will be violent conflict. Yet the Enlightenment softened the tyranny of the West, and the West fractioned into many different ideologies. We have performed a dangerous experiment in the West, the experiment of freedom. Can we maintain a stable society founded upon principles of freedom instead of tyranny? To me, it's an open question. The freedom that we hold so dear is also our kryptonite. The freedom to be divided. We have already proven that freedom is not perfectly stable, as evidenced in the first 100 years of the American system. From the Revolution in 1776 to Civil War in 1861. Yet our Civil War seemed to guide us into a better, more moral system with the absence of slavery. The freedom to be divided, despite resulting in an extremely bloody civil war, perhaps the moral gains in equality made that sacrifice worth it. But is a more moral social system equivalent with a more evolutionarily successful social system? What if slavery is good for the economy of a state? What if oppressing the lower class is the best evolutionary strategy? As the USA declines and China rises as an economic power, it is an open question as to which factors might be making us decline and them rise. The problem with dogmatism. I would say that there is a strong argument for claiming that morality comes from our evolution, not God. You can find examples of moral codes that have evolved in animals. Basing morality in dogmatic monotheistic religion makes the division between our tribes more concrete and inflexible. If a tribe is always dogmatically stubborn that they alone have the truth, all other tribes must necessarily be evil and worthy of destruction. If our morality is not tied to the one only God, perhaps we are more flexible in updating it to match the best philosophy available to our modern age, and we can be more flexible in compromising some aspects of our moral framework with others that disagree with us. In ancient times, it was probably much easier to work with polytheistic nations, because you could absorb their gods into your polytheistic framework, and they could absorb your gods into their polytheistic framework, and form a type of religious syncretism where both of your moral codes get closer and closer and more aligned and more unific. We need to give up the theologically dogmatic roots of our morality if we want to be able to work with those that disagree with us and update our society together. We can respect the fact that religion is also a product of evolution and may have some useful components within it, but it should not be the end-all be-all of moral authority. We should try to extract the best parts of religion and merge it into our modern collective moral philosophy. The problem with objective morality. There seems to be no way to develop an objective morality. Philosophers have been trying and seeming to fail for millennia. The root of every supposed objective morality seems to be a subjective opinion. If you want to use God as the source of objective morality, then you must base that theory on the subjective opinion that God both exists, and God is good, and God has a coherent way to communicate with us, none of which are provable claims. If you want to base your objective morality on the non-aggression principle, then you must base that on the subjective definition of aggression, and the subjective opinion that aggression is always bad. If you want to base an objective morality on the principle of do no harm, it will be necessary to rest that on the subjective definition of harm and the subjective opinion that harm is always bad. The problem with subjective morality. If we are forced to conclude that morality is subjective, what does that mean? Does that mean everything is relative? Does it mean that good and evil don't exist and are merely opinions? Subjective morality presents inherent weakness, a lack of fortitude against criticism and dissension. If a tribe gives up on objective morality and focuses on subjective morality, it might make itself more vulnerable to ideological fractionation and perhaps culminate in a civil war. Therefore, evolution might support brainwashing us to think that morality is objective in order to steer us away from the dangers of relativism and push us towards one powerful collective moral code. Perhaps this is why we evolved a religious instinct. But just because we evolved a certain way doesn't mean that it is necessarily good or right. That would be an appeal to nature fallacy. Philosophy of morality. We should not give up on morality just because of its subjective nature. That should only inspire us to elevate our collective morality. Our democratic system relies on the collective wisdom of the masses. We may not be able to develop an objective morality, but we can develop a morality of the majority. We should try to combine the best ideas into our moral framework rather than be obsessed with the dogmatic packages of ideas. Religion has the golden rule of doing unto others as you would have them do unto you. Progressivism seems to have the rule of do no harm. Libertarianism seems to have the rule of non-aggression. I personally like Sam Harris's rule of maximizing sentient well-being. Perhaps the best moral philosophy might be a proper combination of all these principles. The more we fractionate into moral tribes, the less we can benefit from combining our ideas with each other, and the more likely we'll end up in an unfortunate bloody conflict. Evolution of morality. Each human being seems to have a moral calculator within their emotions. We react to things and try to calculate what is good based on how it makes us feel. Our evolution tries its best to identify problematic behaviors for the species and attack it. If someone hurts you, evolution guides you to want revenge. This is evident in the animal kingdom as a tit-for-tat morality. Why is it good to evolve a revenge instinct? Perhaps that means no one can hurt you without incurring a cost. If all animals are trying to maximize their own success, it is in their best interest to maximize their benefits against costs. Perhaps animals could evolve to steal food from each other, but if animals also evolve a revenge defense mechanism, the behavior of theft will stop because the cost is greater than the benefit. Therefore, the whole species can benefit with more total cooperation. So perhaps we should respect everyone's opinions on morality because they are most likely based on some evolutionary wisdom. Yet at the same time, we must respect the fact that evolution is not always right, and there is a likely to be error in a population. But most likely, the majority of the species will have a stable moral calculator. Evolution reliability fallacy. The problem with relying on our evolutionary toolkit is that what if our environment changes faster than our evolutionary toolkit can keep up with? For example, it is much easier for humans to cooperate in face-to-face communication since that was how we evolved. Yet in the digital age, it is very easy to provoke conflict with the person behind the screen. Our emotional subsystems don't seem to know how to handle faceless communication. We often react to the unknown or less understood with anger, since it poses a theoretical threat. Our technology is destabilizing to our discourse. The danger of democracy. Relying on the wisdom of the majority is a treacherous business. What if they get it wrong like they did in Nazi Germany? I propose that each individual needs to do a cost-benefit analysis of what it means to support the majority. If the majority is so evil that their deeds are even more costly than a civil war, then perhaps a civil war is justified. Since not very many deeds are more atrocious than a civil war, that should be a high enough threshold for helping us identify when disunity is necessary, yet avoid falling into civil war unnecessarily. In our modern scenario of the election steal accusation, even if the election steal were true, it is not necessarily a greater atrocity than a civil war. Therefore, perhaps the masses should continue to support unity and try to rectify a stolen election in a nonviolent manner. The danger of a narrative. Determining good from evil is very dependent on the narrative. The murder of a person is evil until the narrative of terrorist is appended to them. The killing of a fetus is evil until the narrative of killing its mother is appended to it. Treating a certain race, class, or gender differently might be evil until the narrative of oppressor is appended to them. Narratives play an insanely important role in how we view the world, how we view morality, and how we vote. Yet narratives are subject to all the weaknesses of subjectivism and relativism. Who is the oppressor? By what metric? Are they oppressors as a group or individually? Cherry-picking different sets of facts can flip the narrative. If narratives are so easily flipped by changing the set of facts that you look at, evil becomes good and good becomes evil. Failure to see both sides of the debate can cause you to vilify those that are not actually villains. They are merely people with a different set of facts. Failure to understand both sides of a narrative will increase polarization and lead us down the path to civil war. The solution to the narrative. Passion for narratives must be aligned with the amount of supporting evidence for that narrative. In 2020, we had a left-wing narrative that the police are hunting down blacks. After removing outliers, like George Floyd, this narrative seems to be largely untrue as the statistics show it to be quite rare. Yet many people engaged in riots to express their anger at their belief in this narrative. This would have been avoided if the people didn't believe the narrative that there were murderous police everywhere until they saw statistical evidence for it. In 2020, we also had a libertarian narrative that the government was secretly preparing to control everyone by virtue of the COVID restrictions. Many people resisted the safety guidelines. This would have been avoided if people didn't believe the narrative of tyrannical monsters in government until they saw evidence of multiple government officials admitting that they enjoy locking people in their homes for no reason. In 2021, we had a right-wing narrative that the election was stolen. The Capitol was violently invaded as a result of this narrative. This would have been avoided if people didn't believe the narrative of an election steal until they saw the hard proof and quality evidence. Evolution of conspiratorial thinking. In our evolutionary history, we had access to less amounts of data. Perhaps conspiratorial thinking was necessary to protect yourself and expose treacherous plots. It seems to arise out of a curiosity towards patterns and an assumption that something is awry. It is commonly imagined that there are genes that encode for superstition, magical thinking, hearsay, etc., all of which feed into conspiratorial thinking. It is imagined that when we hear noises in the darkness of the jungle of our evolutionary history, the rational genes that said, "There is no evidence of danger in that bush," those rational skeptics were eaten, and those that had a bias to believe in threats without good evidence would have survived encounters with wild predators. Yet our modern environment is much more complex than our historical environment. Making errors in our modern age carries much more danger than benefit, unlike in the past, when it might have been more beneficial. Pros and cons of conspiratorial thinking. Some may say that conspiratorial thinking is important because sometimes conspiracies are proven to be true. This may be true, but the way we deal with them is important. There seems to be little danger in curiosity towards conspiracy theories. Curiosity can help fuel the desire to gather evidence, which can assist in exposing the truth. The unjustified belief in conspiracies, that is the problem. Every event has a multiplicity of potential explanations. The conspiracy theorist becomes obsessed with one interpretation for a pattern of events. His bias filters out alternative possible explanations and hence guides him to see more and more patterns, which is confirming his bias. And by filtering in this manner to only interpret evidence in a way that supports the perspective that he already wants to believe, it just becomes a feedback loop that grows his belief even more. When his or her belief grows strong enough, he will act on his belief, possibly in ways that are harmful to society. The Pizzagate believer, he carried a gun to the restaurant and shot it up. The BLM conspiracy theorists, they burnt down many parts of the country. And QAnon conspiracy theorists stormed the Capitol. I think the conspiracy theorist needs to understand that if the evidence supporting your belief is strong enough, then everyone, or mostly everyone, should believe it. The fact that few people believe it is a problem, a red flag in and of itself. That should be a warning to you that perhaps you have an irrational belief in something that the majority of rational people are rejecting. Conspiracy theorists who don't heed this warning often develop a quasi-religious mindset of thinking that they alone have this esoteric knowledge. They are these wise minority, and the majority of people are either ignorant and need to be saved, or they're evil and trying to suppress this truth as they see it. This narrative comforts them in their ideological loneliness, reminding them that they are the hero of this narrative. Using language like sheep and wake up should be red flags for identifying people who have become lost in their own biases, completely forgetting about epistemic humility. Bias corrupts moral epistemology. Axiology: how we know what is right and wrong. Religious, political, and conspiratorial biases corrupt how you view others, where the in-group is righteous and the out-group is wicked. This bias corrupts your moral epistemology, where you begin to judge people not by their actions, but by their group identity. This bias also leads to a dogmatic adherence to your own moral framework, which further corrupts your moral epistemology by causing you to judge others by your own personal moral code rather than by their moral code. Bias corrupts ontological epistemology. Ontology: how we know what is real and not real. This bias also corrupts your ontological epistemology in that your brain refuses to process information that questions your understanding of reality and only absorbs information that confirms it. It corrupts how you gather information, only gathering the news that supports your bias towards reality. You grow more and more confident in your understanding of reality, even though you are getting further and further from the truth every year. You then use your corrupted understanding of reality to support the narrative that your ideological opponents are evil, cycling back into further corruption of your moral epistemology. Transcending polarization. If Americans can commit to transcending their biases, they will be able to resist in-group and out-group polarization and stave off axiological corruption and ontological corruption. Biases are largely subconscious. The only way to destroy biases is to become conscious of them and continually reject them. This requires a type of bird's eye view of yourself. You need to see yourself as a judgmental logical cortex stuck within a biased creature. As the judgmental logical cortex, it is your job to evaluate the rest of your brain and fix it when it is wrong. This judgmental cortex can identify when the rest of the brain produces an incorrect calculation and then reprogram it to be more accurate. As biases are reprogrammed to be more accurate, they will be better at helping us out of the polarization trap. As these inaccurate biases are destroyed, demonization of the other will be reduced. If they can resist grouping themselves to an identity, then they can stop grouping others by identity, or at least apply much more nuance to the concept of group identities. When moral biases are resisted, it will be easier to stop calling other groups evil. It will become easier to empathize with others and their frameworks for understanding the world. Fighting your biases will make it easier for you to become friends with people outside your in-group. As you befriend a variety of people, they will tell you how they think, and it will be easier and easier to see the good within them despite their opposing framework for viewing the world. You can have more empathy with them when you see and understand that they are victims of bias just like you are. The enemy is not them, but it is the biases within them. As a friend, you will have more power to guide them away from their biases with love. The benefits of diversity. An ant hive needs a variety of types of ants. They need workers and soldiers and the queen. Likewise, a human society needs a variety of type of humans. We need those that care about fairness, and we also need those that care about efficiency. We need a combination of all of the ideologies in order to have a more accurate and balanced view of the world. There is some argument to say that our natural genetic temperaments contribute to our political leanings. There is also research that says this is inaccurate, since temperaments can change over a lifetime, yet don't significantly impact political leanings. Some combination of nature and nurture probably sets you on a political path. Because of confirmation bias, most people stay on the path they were given. Absent that bias, perhaps people would follow their innate temperaments, and they would be guided to ideologies that match their natural values. Do we really want only open-minded people who are disorganized? Do we really want only conscientious people that are rigid and inflexible? Do we really want only empathetic people who can never, ever punish a criminal? Or do we really want only disagreeable people that tyrannize others? Perhaps evolution has figured out the proper ratio of temperaments to bestow to humanity. Perhaps evolution has given us the variety we need to be successful. We should treasure the variety and use it to our advantage, instead of pathologizing our own temperament and deeming it to be the one and only true primal temperament. We should welcome different temperaments. Otherwise, we might be working against our own evolution. Ideological diversity can help us confront our blind spots. Why would we want to be ignorant of something relevant? If we can move past tribal polarization and demonization, we can take advantage of the variety of ideas and form a dialectic in which we learn from each other and grow in our understanding of truth together.